Hello, my name is Michael Proctor. I'm the science advisor for Kootenay Connect. Here I'm going to report on our progress over the last 4 years relative to Environment and Climate Change Canada's Nature Fund funding for community nominated and priority places. First, I want to just take an overview, look at an overview of our region to see how it has affected this whole project. It's basically a very rugged mountainous region. You can see highlighted with large river valleys that flow north and south, where pretty much all the people live. And those are dotted with very large lakes. And this system kind of creates these pinch points at the ends of the lakes where there's a lot of wetland complexes, and become biodiversity hotspots in these wetland areas with a lot of species at risk. And they're also the arenas of cross-valley connectivity between these mountain ranges. And I'm a grizzly bear biologist by trade and been working at the metapopulation scale, and that's inspired me to think in the large landscapes. And we've worked on some grizzly bear and northern leopard frog corridors across the Creston Valley over the last 2 decades, and that has grown into a Kootenay-wide effort, which we call Kootenay Connect. And our vision is to develop and work towards an interconnected region of restored and functioning corridors for species at risk, large mammal movements, biodiversity conservation, ecological processes, ecosystem services, and climate resilience. Our larger vision is to work in 12 corridors across the region, but since we bumped into Environment and Climate Change Canada and their funding, we've focused in on 4 preliminary, I wouldn't say preliminary, but 4 focal areas where we focused our efforts. I'm going to first talk about the Creston Valley. I'm going to just talk about the 4 corridors and give you an overview of the species we've been working on. A lot of the details of activities are contained in other people's reports about each specific corridor, but here I'm going to try to give an overview of the biology and what we've been trying to enhance and how things have been working. There's been a lot of wetland and connectivity restoration work in the Creston Valley, a lot of planting, as you can see in some of the plans there up on the upper right, and some wetland rebuilding, as you can see in the picture there, to benefit leopard frogs. But it also has a long list of species at risk and wetland species and upland species and avian species that are helped. And at the bottom there, we got grizzly bears. This corridor has been particularly important for the reconnecting of what was a totally isolated South Selkirk grizzly bear population 25 years ago. But now we've got our evidence, have been working there for the last 20 years, that shows us completely reconnected with. We've got 29 migrants we've identified, 8 migrants who have had 29 offspring in their new population. So we're looking at functional connectivity. We've basically recovered this population through this corridor. Most of the work there is organized by the Creston Valley Wildlife Management Authority. And as I mentioned, this is cross valley corridor for the grizzly bears and the leopard frogs. But also that's graded into some private land stewardship activities. Like we've identified some areas where we're working with some of the local farmers and ranchers to operate in wildlife connectivity friendly ways. And that is translated into analysis we did last year with a bunch of us got together and looked at the potential for more stewardship across some of the private lands that are adjacent to the wetland complexes. And excuse me, I want to say that a lot of that's going to be run through Farmland Advantage, a very effective program for integrating private ranch land and farmlands into conservation activities. And to move up to the Columbia Wetlands area, it's a really large 180-kilometer long wetlands. That's the headwaters of the Columbia River. Right there in the bottom of the picture is Columbia Lake that moves, the water flows north through Invermere Lake up in through the wetland area. And it's a very important climate corridor, the north-south corridor for many species, but also this is the arena where we need to integrate some cross-valley east-west corridors. Here you can see that area in context of the protected areas. There we've got a rich protected area network in the Kootenays, and we're working to help reconnect it across a lot of the human settled valleys. The Columbia Wetland Stewardship Partners is the lead organization here. They do a lot of hydrologic connectivity work to understand the wetland vulnerability, to help plan where we might put our best management forward in the future. And this entails a lot of beaver engineering, a great wetland engineer and a benefit to these systems, but also a lot of species at risk here, a lot of species at risk work, and some upland connectivity, as I mentioned. And a lot of the species risk work was done by Rachel Darville and others. And she's sort of a tireless species at risk worker and a bird biologist. And she's done surveys up and down the whole valley and really put together a good picture of what's going on there and where are some of the hot spots. I'm going to speak for a moment about some of the multi-species corridors and how we've predicted them. The whole area is a biodiversity hotspot. It's a real challenge to try to pick places where we're going to focus our energy, but we think it's important. Here's a schematic of 4 of the corridors we've ended up picking out, 3 large and 1 small. I'm just going to go through how we got to that place. I've detailed that in previous years' videos, but here just a recap. We got the best available data from several species where there is good modeling data from good telemetry data usually, and the grizzly bears and badgers and wolverine and elk and mountain goat. We put it together and try to get a sense of if we could find some patterns. We got what we affectionately refer to as our spaghetti map, but there are some patterns here, and we looked at it with our science team pretty detailed and came up with those 4 patterns. Also overlaying this are some of that species at risk work that Rachel Darville did. We combined it all to identify private land conservation opportunities, mostly adjacent to the protected wildlife managed area, the protected wetland that's already there. And I'm going to tell a pretty cool little story here about a bear that I helped the BC Conservation Service. I provided a radio collar, and they collared the bear and moved it. It was a conflict bear, and they moved it across the valley. And it's trying to move back to the east side. And on the left, you can see at the beginning of the green path is a radio collared bear trying to get himself back over to the east side of the valley. So he walked up and down. You can see where he moved south past Columbia Lake, and then turned around and picked Columbia Lake, our corridor, right where we sort of predicted bears might cross, and worked his way back up to Kootenay National Park. And this exemplifies our whole park to park and large landscape mountain range connectivity initiative that we think is important. But here you get a close-up look at his movements as he came down into that corridor. You can see the yellow dots are buildings, and he was very good at avoiding people. He just sort of stayed equidistant between the various developments. And the orange polygon in the middle there is a property just purchased by the Nature Trust of BC as part of our biological conservation opportunities. And you can see the link between those important, using the science to predict the corridor, to monitor the animals, and then suggest an action. It gets taken and it benefits the bears. And you can see the path of the bear walk through a bunch of other previously occupied or previously gathered or designated conservation properties as he moves south. We're going to move on to the Wycliffe area. If I can keep up with my slide, it keeps moving maybe just a little bit ahead of where I would like to go. So you can see this area is pretty important. Combination of wetland and grasslands. The wetlands are on the right and the grasslands are on the left of this arena, just off the the Kootenay River as it's running south here in the Kimberley area. And the Nature Trust of BC and the Nature Conservancy Canada, the lead organizations here that work also with Flynn Row and some of their conservation properties. They're basically working on grassland restoration, species at risk, habitat restoration, invasive species work, and some fencing to exclude cattle and vehicles. They've focused on American badger, Lewis's woodpecker, Williamson sapsuckers, and the ubiquitous grizzly bear, who seems to want to cross most of our corridors. We've got good tracks and some photos of the bears using this area. Just trying to point out the link between the large mammal movements, large carnivores, and some of the species at risk, and highlight how that we think it's an important combination to consider. Here we're going to move to the Bonanza area now, the smallest area, but not the least in any way, shape, or form. It's a spectacular valley north of the the Slocan Lake that runs, drains the Bonanza Creek out of Summit Lake there at the north end of the picture. They've been working on also heavy wetland restoration work going on there across 3 of their areas, and they're working on hydrologic connectivity to sort of undo some of the effects of a older railway bed that was built up and fragmenting the wetlands, inhibiting the water flow. As some of the species that are benefiting here, the western toad, a very important western toad population coming out of Summit Lake, and some of the other surrounding lakes in the area. They're really working with trying to reestablish beaver. There's a healthy beaver population that has been partially reduced, and they're trying to bring some of it back. These important wetland engineers, but there's been an amazing amount of work by to document the biodiversity in the area. Just kind of a spotlight on this here. Ryan Duran and Tyson Ehlers. If you haven't gone out with Ryan Duran and watched him dig through the mud and the muck in a wetlands and come up with a slime mold on his fingernail, you haven't lived yet. It's absolutely amazing to watch these guys work, and it really brings home the complexity of these ecosystems. It's nice to bring it alive. And of course, we got grizzly bears crossing this corridor as well. We got some good videos of bears moving through here. The Slocan Lake Stewardship Society, the lead organization, has taken the 4 years of work that they've done through this funding and rolled it up into a larger landscape conservation management plan, trying to reconnect over the bigger scale between some of the provincial parks. And this just exemplifies how some of the work we're doing is continuing and expanding and just improving our region's ecological potential. Some of the projects that we have been included are working across all 4 areas. I'm just going to highlight a few here. The Wildlife Conservation Society of Canada has a bat program, and they work to provide temporary old growth forest roosts by putting up Brandon bark. It really does work. Bats take to them right away, and while we're trying to grow back some of our old growth forests in the region. And they do some acoustic monitoring and migration monitoring across the whole region. It's a part of a nationwide effort. They're creating bat roosts in old growth forests through chainsaw work up in the trees there, you can see. And they also are part of building some condos for some of the bat species. But I'd like to highlight and make sure you note that there's a lot of bat species. There's many bat species in British Columbia. It's not like when we talk about ungulates, we talk about, that's not just one ungulate species, that's a branch of species. And when we talk about bats, it's actually a lot of species. So the hoary bat, the northern myotis, the yuma, and little brown myotis are important species in this area. Another project across the corridors is run by Marlene Mockmer, looking at in response to some population declines of great blue heron. She's looking at identifying breeding sites and monitoring some of the active sites and trying to implement, carry out stewardship activities where appropriate. And we also try to see and work through a climate lens in the whole region. We've been working with Greg Utzik, who's a local regional climate modeler and who's trying to use as much data as he possibly can to integrate climate modeling within each of our corridors to help with our planning and thinking and activities. But that also goes across the whole Kootenay region, just to give you a shot of here how trying to put the whole region into this context. All these results I've been talking about can be reviewed in this one of our annual reports. We're putting together a year 4 annual report, Marcy Marr and I, and it's a bit of a tome, but it's got a lot of detail in here. You can go around and look at your area of interest and see what's been going on. We've been looking at our future. Environment Climate Change Canada has extended our funding for another 3 years, and we've branched out into 3 more corridors. I'm just going to talk about one of those real briefly. The Columbia Lake Corridor, another branch of Kootenay Connect, is trying to work to get some of these areas recognized and established as ecological corridors at a policy level, so they become sort of permanentized and more integrated into the way we live and work and play in the whole region. So this is a pilot project where we brought together the federal government through Parks Canada and BC Parks and the Flynn Roe Ministry of Environment at the provincial level, and several First Nations, the Ktunaxa Nation and the Shuswap Nation. And we have been working together for a couple of years trying to work towards this corridor recognition. And using all the available data, we've brought a lot of data, pretty much everything that's out there, and tried to boil it down into corridors that sort of sweep an abraded river around the Columbia Lake area as sort of a depiction of what we're working towards. And just to wind up, Kootenay Connect is joining the world stage and arena by working to protect biodiversity, build climate resilience, ecological connectivity, and integrity of our local area, province, country, and the planet. Our work in the Kootenays has a worldwide implications and significance, as we have all seen while following the recent biodiversity conference, COP15, in Montreal this year. These are global problems requiring global solutions. And I'd like to give special thanks to Environment and Climate Change Canada, Wilberforce Foundation, Liz Claiborne, Art Ortenberg Foundation, and Nature Conservancy Canada, who helped keep me afloat during a lot of this work. So thank you very much. Hope this has been interesting.